We have more than any people in history. More food, more information, more comfort, more ways to connect. And yet, we feel more disconnected, more anxious, and more overwhelmed than ever before. A medieval peasant owned maybe five things. Their world was a few square miles. Their daily concern was starvation or disease. It was a hard, brutal life. So what could they possibly teach us? What if the very harshness of their world forced them to discover a kind of wisdom we've lost? A wisdom born not from abundance, but from scarcity. Not from speed, but from slowness. And not from global networks, but from the person standing next to them. We look back at the Middle Ages from roughly the 5th to the 15th century and call them the Dark Ages. But maybe, just maybe, they have some light to shed on our own time. What if the secrets to a simpler, more meaningful life aren't in a new app or a productivity hack, but in the forgotten rhythms of 1,000 years ago? Number 25. What if your survival depended on your neighbor? We think of independence as a strength. We want to be self-sufficient. We build fences, both literal and metaphorical. We live in private homes, drive in private cars, and stare at private screens. But in the medieval world, independence was a death sentence. The core wisdom wasn't about being strong on your own. It was about mending the fence before you even needed your neighbor. It was about understanding that your survival was tied to theirs. Think about a typical medieval village. Most people were peasants living under a manorial system. They didn't own their land, they worked it for a lord, but they didn't work it alone. The fields were often divided into strips, and your strips were right next to someone else's. You had to coordinate, you had to plant at the same time, harvest at the same time. If one person's ox died, they needed to borrow one from a neighbor, or the whole family might starve. The concept of the commons, a shared piece of land for grazing animals or gathering firewood, was central to village life. It was a shared resource that required shared responsibility. If you abused it, everyone suffered. A dispute with your neighbor wasn't just awkward. It was dangerous. It could mean social isolation, which could lead to actual starvation. Those social bonds were not a lifestyle choice. They were a survival mechanism. This wasn't just about farming. It was about everything. When a house needed to be built, the community came together for a barn raising. When someone was sick, neighbors brought food. The church was the center of social life, the place for festivals, markets, and gossip. Life was intensely, unavoidably communal. The historian Barbara Tuchman, in her book A Distant Mirror, paints a picture of the 14th century where the collective, the guild, the village, the parish was everything. The individual was secondary. Now look at us. We have thousands of friends online, but many of us don't know the names of the people living in the next apartment. We can order anything we need with a click, so we don't have to ask anyone for a favor. We've outsourced our interdependence to corporations and algorithms, and the cost is staggering. The sociologist Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone in 2000, documenting the collapse of American community life over the preceding decades. He showed how participation in everything from bowling leagues to PTAs had plummeted. Things have only gotten worse since then. Studies now regularly show a direct link between loneliness and poor health. One famous study from Brigham Young University found that chronic loneliness can be as damaging to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. We have engineered a world of perfect, comfortable isolation, and it is killing us. The medieval peasant knew something we've forgotten. They knew that a strong community isn't a nice to have. It's the foundation of a resilient life. They weren't trying to be friendly. They were trying to survive. They mended fences, literally and figuratively, because a broken fence meant lost sheep, and a broken relationship meant a lost lifeline. What do we still not know? Is our brain's capacity for deep, meaningful connection finite, and are we squandering it on hundreds of shallow online relationships? What if the rise of individualism is not a sign of progress, but a slow-motion social collapse? At what point does a society become so fragmented that it can no longer solve its collective problems? Number 24, could you survive if the supermarket disappeared? We walk into a grocery store and see a miracle of logistics. Apples from New Zealand, coffee from Colombia, fish from the North Atlantic. We are utterly dependent on a global supply chain that is complex, fragile, and completely invisible to most of us. We don't know where our food comes from. We don't know how to grow it. We don't even know what most of the plants growing in our own backyards are. For a medieval person, this ignorance would be unthinkable. Their wisdom was simple and profound: know your weeds. To them, there was no such thing as a weed In the modern sense, every plant had a purpose. It was either food, medicine, or useful for something like dye or fiber. A peasant woman would have an encyclopedic knowledge of the local landscape. She would know that dandelions were not a pest to be eradicated with chemicals, but a nutritious green for a salad and a root that could be roasted for a coffee-like drink. She would know that stinging nettles, when boiled, lost their sting and became a vitamin-rich vegetable similar to spinach. She knew that yarrow could be used to stop bleeding and that plantain leaves could soothe an insect bite. This wasn't a hobby, it wasn't foraging for a trendy blog post. It was a crucial part of the food supply and the family's first line of medical defense. Hildegard of Bingen, a remarkable 12th century abbess, scientist, and composer, wrote extensively about the natural world. In her book Physica, she cataloged hundreds of plants, animals, and minerals, and their medicinal properties. While her work was exceptional in its scope, the basic principle of using the local environment for healing was common knowledge. This was information passed down from mother to daughter, from one generation to the next. It was a form of wealth that couldn't be taxed or taken away. It was knowledge woven into the very fabric of daily life. The forest and the field were not just scenery, they were a pantry and a pharmacy. We have lost this connection. Our environment is something to be paved over, built upon, or manicured into a sterile lawn. The average person can recognize hundreds of corporate logos, but can't identify the 5 most common trees in their region. This disconnect has consequences. Our food system is vulnerable to disruption from fuel prices, climate events, or political instability. And our physical and mental health suffers from what the author Richard Louv calls nature deficit disorder. We are biologically programmed to be in nature, yet we spend most of our lives in climate-controlled boxes staring at screens. The medieval wisdom to know your weeds is a call to reconnect with the physical world around us. It's a reminder that our environment is not inert. It is alive, and it can sustain us if we have the knowledge to work with it. Modern science is starting to catch up, confirming the nutritional benefits of foraged foods and the psychological benefits of spending time in nature. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, has been shown in studies to reduce stress, lower blood pressure, and boost the immune system. We are slowly, painstakingly rediscovering what our ancestors knew by necessity. But what don't we know yet? How much of this ancestral plant knowledge has been permanently lost with the extinction of languages and cultures? If our global supply chain were to break down for just 1 month, what percentage of the population has the basic skills to find safe food and water? Are we creating generations so detached from the natural world that they can no longer perceive its intrinsic value, only its potential for commercial exploitation? Number 23 is multitasking, a myth we tell ourselves. Our modern world worships at the altar of multitasking. We pride ourselves on juggling emails while on a conference call, listening to a podcast while cooking dinner, and scrolling through social media while watching a movie. We see it as a sign of efficiency and productivity, but a medieval craftsman would look at our frantic activity and see only chaos. Their wisdom was built on a foundation of single-minded focus. Do one thing at a time. Imagine a blacksmith in the 13th century. When he was at the forge, he was only at the forge. His entire being was focused on the heat of the fire, the color of the metal, the weight of the hammer, the sound of the strike. A moment's inattention could result in a ruined piece of work or a serious injury. There were no notifications, no emails, no buzzing phone to shatter his concentration. His work demanded and created a state of deep focus. The same was true for a scribe in a monastery scriptorium, painstakingly copying a manuscript 1 letter at a time for hours on end. Or a weaver at a loom, or hands and feet moving in a complex, rhythmic dance. Their world was not designed for distraction. It was designed for deep, immersive, single tasking. The very concept of time was different. For most people, time was not measured in minutes and seconds. It was measured by the position of the sun, the ringing of church bells for the canonical hours, and the rhythm of the seasons. It was a more fluid, task-oriented sense of time. You worked until the task was done, not until the clock said 5 p.m. This mindset fosters a different relationship with work. It encourages absorption in the task at hand, rather than a frantic race against an abstract clock. The Benedictine monks, following the 6th century rule of Saint Benedict, divided their day into balanced periods of prayer, work labora, and study. Each had its appointed time, and each was to be given full attention. We, on the other hand, live in an age of perpetual distraction. The writer Cal Newport calls the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task deep work. And he argues that this skill is becoming increasingly rare and increasingly valuable in our economy. He's backed by neuroscience. Earl Miller, a neuroscientist at MIT, has shown that our brains are not wired for multitasking. When we think we're multitasking, we're actually just task switching. We are rapidly switching our attention back and forth between different tasks. Each switch has a cognitive cost. It burns up mental energy, slows us down, and increases the likelihood of errors. We feel busy, but we are often less effective. We are training our brains to be in a constant state of shallow, fragmented attention. The medieval wisdom of doing one thing at a time is not about being slow or unproductive. It's about recognizing that true productivity and true satisfaction comes from deep engagement. It's about giving a task the respect of your full attention. It's about finding the flow state that a craftsman knew in his workshop or a monk knew in his scriptorium. It's about reclaiming our minds from the constant onslaught of digital noise. But here are the unsettling questions. Has our culture of constant task switching permanently rewired our brains, making deep contemplative thought a biological impossibility for future generations? What if the next great scientific breakthrough or work of art is being prevented not by a lack of talent, but by 1,000 daily notifications? As deep work becomes a rarer skill, will it create a new cognitive class divide between those who can focus and those who can't? Number 22, what if you couldn't buy your way out of a problem? We live in a consumer society. Our default solution to almost any problem is to buy something. Feeling sad? Retail therapy. Need a new hobby? Buy all the gear. Don't know how to fix something? Buy a new one? This endless cycle of acquiring and discarding is central to our modern economy. A person in the Middle Ages would be baffled by this. Their life was governed by a different principle, a wisdom of profound practicality: use what you have. And if it breaks, fix it. For the vast majority of medieval people, material possessions were scarce and incredibly valuable. A peasant family might own one set of clothes, a few cooking pots, some basic tools, and maybe a wooden chest to keep them in. Everything was handmade, either by them or by a local artisan. There were no factories churning out cheap, disposable goods. An iron pot was a significant investment, expected to last a lifetime. A woolen cloak was the product of immense labor, from shearing the sheep to spinning the yarn, weaving the cloth, and sewing the garment. When that cloak got a hole in it, you didn't throw it away. You patched it. And when it was too tattered to be a cloak, you cut it up for rags or used it to stuff a mattress. Nothing was wasted. This was not an ethical choice born from environmental consciousness. It was a simple, hard reality. Waste was a luxury no one could afford. This mindset of repair and reuse, of make, do, and mend, was woven into the fabric of life. A farmer was also a carpenter, a leather worker, and a handyman. He had to know how to repair a fence, rehandle an axe, or patch a roof. The skills of maintenance were as important as the skills of creation. This created a deep, intimate knowledge of the material world. You understood how things were made because you had to know how to make them and remake them. You had a relationship with your possessions, not as disposable commodities, but as lifelong companions in the struggle for survival. Compare that to our world. We are surrounded by black boxes. We use smartphones, cars, and appliances that we have no idea how to repair. They are not designed to be repaired. They are designed to be replaced. This phenomenon, known as planned obsolescence, has been a cornerstone of consumer manufacturing since the 1920s. It fuels economic growth, but it comes at a huge environmental cost, and it distills us. We have become helpless consumers instead of capable creators. The right to repair movement, a modern legislative effort to force companies to make their products more easily fixable, is a direct reaction to this. It's an attempt to reclaim a piece of that medieval wisdom. The medieval mindset of using what you have forces ingenuity. It breeds creativity. When you can't just buy a solution, you have to invent one. It fosters a sense of competence and self-reliance. The psychologist Martin Seligman's work on learned helplessness shows that when people feel they have no control over their situation, they can fall into passivity and depression. Conversely, developing tangible skills and seeing the direct results of your own labor fixing a chair, darning a sock, growing a vegetable, can be a powerful antidote to this. Saved lives, taking care of everyone else, it's all professional. So what are the deeper questions we haven't answered? By designing a world where nothing is meant to last, have we inadvertently taught ourselves that relationships, careers, and commitments are also disposable? What is the long-term psychological impact of living in a world where we are constantly encouraged to be dissatisfied with what we have? If our complex systems of manufacturing and disposal were to fail, how long would it take for the basic skills of repair and maintenance to re-emerge? And how many of us would be left helpless? Number 21, are you living by the clock or by the sun? We are ruled by the clock. Our days are chopped into minutes and seconds. We have meetings at 9:30, deadlines at 5, and alarms that jolt us out of sleep at 6:15. This obsession with abstract mechanical time is a relatively new invention. For most of human history, and certainly throughout the medieval period, life moved to a different rhythm. Wisdom was to live by the seasons, not by the second. For a medieval farmer, the year was a great wheel, turning slowly through the cycles of planting, growing, harvesting, and resting. The day was governed by the sun. You rose with the dawn and went to bed not long after dusk, because candles were a luxury. The work you did was determined by the season. Spring was for plowing and sowing. Summer was for tending the crops and making hay. Autumn was the frantic, exhausting work of the harvest. And winter was a time of forced slowness. The days were short, the weather was cold, and there was less to do outdoors. It was a time for mending tools, spinning wool, and telling stories by the fire. It was a natural, cyclical rhythm of intense work, followed by deep rest. This seasonal living was punctuated by holy days, or holidays. The church calendar provided a framework for the year, with major festivals like Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost breaking up the periods of work. These festivals were not just religious observances, they were crucial community celebrations, often lasting for days, involving feasting, dancing, and games. They were the release valves that made the hard labor of the rest of the year bearable. Historian Eamon Duffy, in his book The Stripping of the Altars, shows how deeply this liturgical calendar shaped the consciousness and daily life of pre-Reformation England. The seasons of the soul and the seasons of the soil were intertwined. Our modern life has tried to obliterate seasonality. With electric light, we have conquered the night. With central heating and air conditioning, we have tamed the weather. With global food distribution, we can eat strawberries in January. We work the same 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, regardless of whether it's a long, light day in June or a dark, cold day in December. We have flattened the year into a monotonous, unvarying straight line of productivity. And we are paying the price. We suffer from burnout because we never have a true season of rest. We feel a strange sense of dislocation because our lives are out of sync with the natural world. The conditions like seasonal affective disorder, SAD, are a clear medical manifestation of this disconnect. The medieval wisdom of living by the seasons is a call to reintroduce rhythm and variation into our lives. It doesn't mean we have to abandon our jobs and start farming, but it could mean acknowledging that we are not machines. We are biological creatures, and we have a deep-seated need for cycles of work and rest, of outward activity and inward reflection. It could mean taking more time off in the winter or spending more evenings outside in the summer. It could mean aligning our projects with our natural energy levels, which often fluctuate with the seasons. It means listening to our bodies and to the world around us, instead of just the tyrannical ticking of the clock. This leads to some troubling questions. Have we built an economic system that is fundamentally at odds with our own biology? What has been the psychological cost of divorcing human time from natural time? If our technology allows us to ignore the seasons completely, will we evolve into creatures who no longer need them, or will we simply break? Number 20. When was the last time you were truly quiet? We are drowning in noise, the noise of traffic, the noise of television, the noise of notifications, the noise of endless chatter, both online and off. We have become so accustomed to constant auditory stimulation that silence can feel uncomfortable, even threatening. We reach for our phones to fill any quiet moment, but in the medieval world, silence was not empty. It was a powerful presence, a source of wisdom, and a path to the divine. The lesson they offer is to seek silence as if it were a nutrient. The most profound example of this was in the monastic tradition. For monks and nuns following the rule of Saint Benedict, silence was a cornerstone of their existence. The Great Silence was observed from evening until morning, but even during the day, speech was restricted and used with great intention. This wasn't about being antisocial, it was about creating an interior space for contemplation and prayer. In the quiet, you could hear the voice of God, or in more secular terms, you could hear your own thoughts more clearly. The 14th century anonymous English text, The Cloud of Unknowing, is a guide to contemplative prayer that emphasizes letting go of thoughts and words to simply rest in a silent awareness of the divine. This was a sophisticated, disciplined practice of quieting the mind that we are only now beginning to appreciate through the lens of modern mindfulness. But it wasn't just monks who experienced silence. For an ordinary person, life was simply much quieter. There was no engine noise. The sounds of the world were the sounds of nature, wind, birds, rain, and the sounds of human and animal labor, the blacksmith's hammer, the woodcutter's axe, the lowing of cattle. After dark, the world fell into a profound quiet that is almost impossible for us to experience today. The absence of noise pollution meant you could think. You could talk without shouting. You could be alone with your thoughts without 1,000 artificial distractions competing for your attention. Today, we are in a crisis of noise. The World Health Organization has identified noise pollution as a serious threat to public health, linking it to stress, sleep disturbance, heart disease, and impaired cognitive function in children. And that's just the audible noise. The digital noise is arguably even more damaging. The constant stream of information, opinions, and demands from our devices creates a state of perpetual cognitive overload. We never have a chance to process our experiences, to consolidate our memories, to simply be. Nicholas Carr, in his book The Shallows, argues that the internet is physically rewiring our brains, making us better at scanning for information, but worse at deep, sustained thought. We are losing our capacity for contemplation. The medieval embrace of silence is a powerful antidote. It's a call to intentionally carve out moments of quiet in our noisy lives. This can be as formal as a meditation practice, or as simple as taking a walk in the woods without headphones, sitting in a room without a screen on, or just resisting the urge to fill every spare second with a podcast or social media. It's about rediscovering the value of an uncluttered mind. It's about understanding that in silence we can find clarity, creativity, and a deeper connection to ourselves. But what are the truly unknown consequences of our noisy world? Is the constant external stimulation stunting our ability to develop a rich, stable inner life and a strong sense of self? What if the epidemic of anxiety we are experiencing is a direct result of our brains never getting a chance to enter a resting default state? Could a society that loses its capacity for silence also lose its capacity for wisdom? Number 19, do you own your things or do they own you? We accumulate stuff, houses, cars, clothes, gadgets. We work long hours to afford them. We spend our weekends cleaning and maintaining them. We worry about them being stolen or damaged. Our possessions are supposed to bring us freedom and happiness, but often they become a source of stress and a cage of our own making. The medieval world, largely by necessity, held a different wisdom travel light. This idea is most powerfully expressed in the concept of the pilgrimage. Pilgrimage was a central part of medieval life. People from all walks of life would undertake long, arduous journeys to sacred sites like Canterbury, Rome, or Santiago de Compostela. A pilgrim was, by definition, someone who left almost everything behind. They took only what they could carry: a staff, a small bag of scrip, a water gourd, and a simple cloak. For a time, they shed their social status, their possessions, and their daily responsibilities. They became vulnerable, dependent on the hospitality of strangers and the grace of God. This act of radical simplification was spiritually transformative. By letting go of their material world, they were free to focus on the inner world. The journey itself, with its physical hardships and dangers, became a metaphor for the journey of life. The 14th century English mystic Marjorie Kempe, one of the most famous pilgrims of her time, documented her extensive travels and the spiritual insights she gained from a life of constant movement and material poverty. The ideal of the wandering friar, like St. Francis of Assisi, who renounced all his family's wealth to live a life of poverty and service, captured the medieval imagination. It was a powerful statement that true wealth was not in what you owned, but in what you were free from. We have inverted this. Our culture tells us that success is measured by accumulation. The more we have, the more we are. But this comes at a cost. The modern minimalist movement is a direct rebellion against this ethos. People like Joshua Fields Milburn and Ryan Nicodemus, the minimalists, argue that we can find more happiness and freedom by consciously choosing to own less. Their philosophy echoes the ancient wisdom of the pilgrim. They argue that every object we own takes up not just physical space, but mental space. It requires our time, our energy, and our attention. By curating our lives to include only the essential, we free up those resources for what truly matters: relationships, experiences, and personal growth. Scientific research backs this up. Studies by psychologists like Leif Van Boven and Thomas Gilovich have shown that people derive more long-term happiness from experiences like travel, concerts, or meals with friends than they do from material possessions. The initial thrill of a new purchase fades quickly for a phenomenon known as hedonic adaptation system, but the memories of experiences tend to grow richer over time. We are living in a way that is directly contrary to what science tells us makes us happy. The medieval wisdom to travel light is a reminder that our possessions can become a burden. It asks us to question our relationship with stuff. Do we need it? Does it serve a purpose? Does it bring us joy? Or is it just another thing to manage, another anchor weighing us down? It's an invitation to find freedom not in acquiring more, but in needing less. But there are some deep, unanswered questions here. Is the human desire to accumulate possessions an evolutionary drive that is now maladaptive in our world of abundance? What if our entire economic model, which is based on perpetual growth and consumption, is fundamentally incompatible with long-term human well-being? If we were to suddenly embrace a culture of radical simplicity, could our current civilization even survive? Number 18, what does it mean to do a good day's work? We live with a strange paradox about work. Many of us work in jobs that feel abstract and disconnected from any tangible outcome. We move information around on screens, sit in meetings, and write reports. At the end of the day, it can be hard to point to what we've actually accomplished. At the same time, we are obsessed with productivity, with life hacks, with squeezing every last drop of efficiency out of our time. The medieval world offers a simpler, more grounded wisdom: a day's work for a day's pay, and let the work be real. For the vast majority of people in the Middle Ages, work was physical, tangible, and its results were immediately apparent. When a farmer plowed a field, he saw the turned earth behind him. When a carpenter built a table, the table was there, solid and real. When a baker baked bread, the smell filled the street and the loaves fed the village. There was an undeniable connection between effort and outcome. This is a source of profound, simple satisfaction that is missing from many modern jobs. The writer Matthew Crawford, in his book Shop Class: A Soulcraft, argues that manual labor can be a deeply intellectual and fulfilling activity, and that our society's move away from it has had negative psychological consequences. We have a fundamental human need to see the impact of our work on the physical world. The guild system, which flourished in the High Middle Ages, institutionalized this idea. A guild was an association of artisans or merchants who controlled the practice of their craft in a particular town. It set standards for quality, trained apprentices, and ensured a fair price for its members' work. A master craftsman took immense pride in his skill. His reputation, his identity, and his livelihood were all tied up in the quality of his work. The goal wasn't just to make money, it was to achieve mastery. This pursuit of excellence for its own sake created a culture of quality and durability that is hard to imagine today. A well-made medieval cathedral still stands 1,000 years later. A modern smartphone is designed to be obsolete in 2. This wasn't an easy life. The hours were long, the labor was hard, and the rewards were often meager. But there was a certain dignity in it. The concept of a just price and a living wage, debated by scholastic philosophers like Thomas Aquinas, suggests a moral dimension to the economy that is often absent today. The idea was that work should be compensated fairly, enough to support a family in a decent manner, not just to generate maximum profit for a distant owner. Our modern work culture has often severed the link between effort and result, and between work and meaning. The rise of what the anthropologist David Graeber called bullshit jobs points to a crisis of purpose in the modern workplace. These are jobs that are so pointless, or even pernicious, that even the person doing them can't justify their existence. Yet we are expected to devote the best hours of our day, the best years of our lives, to them. We chase promotions and titles, but often feel an underlying sense of emptiness. The medieval craftsman may have been poor, but he probably didn't suffer from an existential crisis about whether his work mattered. The wisdom here is not to romanticize backbreaking labor, it's to recognize our deep-seated need for tangible, meaningful work. It's a call to find ways, either in our jobs or outside of them, to create something real. to build a garden, to cook a meal from scratch, to learn a craft, to fix something that's broken. It's about reconnecting our hands and our minds and finding the simple, honest satisfaction of a job well done. And this leaves us with some big questions. What happens to a society when a large portion of its population works in jobs they secretly believe are useless? Is the modern obsession with passion and finding your purpose a symptom of an economic system that has stripped work of its inherent meaning? Could we design an economy that prioritizes human satisfaction and tangible results over abstract metrics of growth? Number 17, how do you face a world you can't control? We are obsessed with control. We have apps to manage our schedules, our diets, our finances. We have insurance for every conceivable disaster. We have scientific models that claim to predict everything from the weather to the stock market. We believe that with enough data and enough technology, we can eliminate uncertainty and bend the world to our will. The medieval person lived in a world that was profoundly, terrifyingly uncontrollable. Their wisdom, born of this reality, was a hard-won lesson in acceptance. Think of the life of a medieval peasant. Their existence was at the mercy of forces far beyond their control. A drought could wipe out the crops and bring famine. A wet summer could lead to fungus and rot. An outbreak of plague, like the Black Death in the mid-14th century, which killed a third or more of Europe's population, could destroy a village in a matter of weeks. War, banditry, and the whims of a local lord were constant threats. Life was precarious, and death was an ever-present reality. There was no illusion of control. This constant uncertainty fostered a different kind of psychological resilience. Instead of trying to control the uncontrollable, people focused on endurance and faith. The dominant philosophical and religious framework, Christianity, provided a way to make sense of suffering. Hardship was not seen as a sign of personal failure, but as a test of faith, a part of the human condition, or a consequence of a fallen world. The concept of fortuna, often depicted as a woman turning a great wheel, was a powerful medieval symbol. It represented the capriciousness of fate. One day you could be at the top of the wheel, a king in his castle, and the next you could be at the bottom, a beggar in the mud. The lesson was not to try to stop the wheel from turning, but to cultivate an inner stability that was not dependent on your external circumstances. The philosopher Boethius, writing his Consolation of Philosophy in the 6th century while awaiting execution, explored this very idea, arguing that true happiness can only be found in the mind and in virtue, not in the fleeting gifts of fortune. We, in our sanitized, risk-managed world, have lost this muscle of acceptance. We see every setback as a problem to be solved, every discomfort as an injustice to be rectified. When something bad happens, our first instinct is to find someone to blame or a system to fix. This can be a force for progress, but it can also lead to a state of constant anxiety and frustration. We are enraged by traffic jams, devastated by minor illnesses, and thrown into despair by career setbacks. We have, as the Stoic philosophers would say, confused what is in our control with what is not. The modern therapeutic movement of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, is in many ways a rediscovery of this ancient wisdom. It teaches people to accept what is outside of their personal control and commit to action that improves and enriches their lives. The medieval wisdom of acceptance is not about passivity or resignation. It is not about giving up. It is a pragmatic recognition of reality. It is about conserving your energy for the things you can change and finding the grace and fortitude to endure the things you cannot. It's about building a strong inner fortress that cannot be breached by the unpredictable storms of the outside world. But this raises some very difficult questions. If we become too accepting of hardship, do we lose the motivation to fight against injustice and improve our world? Is there a danger that the powerful can use the language of acceptance to keep the oppressed in their place? And what if our technology eventually gives us near total control over our environment and even our own biology? Will we lose the very resilience and character that is forged in the fires of adversity? Number 16, are your roots an inch deep or a mile wide? We are a transient people. We move for college, for jobs, for a better climate, for a change of scenery. The average American moves over 11 times in their lifetime. We think of this mobility as freedom. But there is a hidden cost. We often live with a shallow sense of place, disconnected from the land, the history, and the community around us. The medieval person was, for the most part, the exact opposite. Their life was defined by a deep, immovable sense of belonging to a particular place. Their wisdom was to know your place, not just in society, but on the earth. For the vast majority of medieval people, the world was their village and the few miles of surrounding countryside. Most people were born, lived, and died within the same small radius. They might travel to a nearby market town once a week, or go on a pilgrimage once in their lifetime, but their daily existence was intensely local. This wasn't a choice serfdom legally tied many peasants to the land, but this lack of mobility created a relationship with their environment that is almost unimaginable to us. A farmer knew his patch of land with an intimacy that a modern agronomist with all his sensors and data could never replicate. He knew the soil in every part of the field player, where it was sandy, where it was clay, where it held water. He knew the local weather patterns, not from a forecast, but from the feel of the wind and the look of the clouds. He knew the names, uses, and stories associated with every hill, stream, and ancient tree. This was a deep, multi-generational knowledge passed down through families. The landscape was not just a resource, it was a character in their lives, a part of their identity. The Domesday Book of 1086, a massive survey of England commissioned by William the Conqueror, was an attempt to catalog this deeply rooted world of manors, villages, and fields. This sense of place extended to the community. In a village where the same families had lived for centuries, you knew everyone, and everyone knew you. You knew their parents and their grandparents. Your family histories were intertwined. This created a powerful sense of social cohesion and mutual obligation, but also a lack of privacy and a resistance to change. You were not an anonymous individual. You were the son of John the Miller, from the cottage by the stream. Your identity was inseparable from your place and your people. We have traded this deep-rootedness for a kind of perpetual shallow nomadism, and we live in places, but are not of them. We may not know our neighbors, the local history, or the native plants. Our communities are often online, detached from physical geography. The writer and farmer Wendell Berry has written extensively about this modern placelessness. He argues that a healthy culture is one that is based on a deep, loving, and responsible connection to a particular place. When we are not rooted, we have no incentive to care for our local environment or our local community. We become consumers of places rather than stewards of them. The medieval wisdom of knowing your place is a call to put down roots. It doesn't mean we must all stay in the town where we were born, but it does mean choosing to invest ourselves in the place where we are. It means learning the names of the local birds and trees. It means shopping at the local farmer's market. It means learning the history of our town. It means getting to know our neighbors. It is about choosing to belong somewhere, to be a citizen of a particular patch of earth, not just a transient resident. And yet, we must ask the hard questions. Is this deep-rootedness only possible in a static hierarchical society, and is it fundamentally incompatible with the dynamism and social mobility we value today? What if putting down deep roots makes us parochial and fearful of outsiders and new ideas? In a globalized world facing global problems like climate change, is a focus on the intensely local a necessary foundation for action or a dangerous distraction? Number 15, why are you in such a hurry? Our lives are a sprint. We rush from one task to the next, optimize our mornings for maximum productivity, and hustle to get ahead. We eat fast food, read summaries of books, and communicate in abbreviations. Slowness is seen as a form of failure. The medieval world, operating at the speed of a walking man or a trotting horse, had a different understanding of time. Their wisdom, born from necessity, was to embrace the virtue of slowness. Life in the Middle Ages was not slow because people were lazy. It was slow because of physical limitations. Travel was arduous and time-consuming. A journey of 20 miles was a full day's undertaking. Communication was even slower. A letter from London to Rome could take months to arrive, if it arrived at all. Agricultural work was dictated by the slow, steady pace of animal labor and human muscle. Everything took time. You couldn't speed up the harvest or rush the growth of a forest. This reality forced a different mindset. Patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a basic requirement for survival. This slowness allowed for a different quality of attention and craftsmanship. Think of the construction of a great Gothic cathedral, like Chartres in France. These massive, intricate structures often took centuries to complete. Generations of stonemasons, carpenters, and glassworkers devoted their entire lives to a project they knew they would never see finished. They were building for eternity, for the glory of God. This required an almost superhuman patience and a long-term vision that is absent from our modern world of quarterly reports and short-term profits. Each stone was carved with care, each pane of glass was placed with precision. The work was slow, deliberate, and built to last. The Italian slow food movement, founded by Carlo Petrini in 1986 as a protest against the opening of a McDonald's in Rome, is a modern attempt to reclaim this medieval sense of time. It advocates for a return to local food traditions, to meals that are grown, prepared, and eaten with care and attention. The movement's philosophy has expanded to other areas, inspiring slow cities, slow travel, and slow money. It's a conscious rejection of the modern obsession with speed and efficiency. It argues that by slowing down, we can improve our health, our relationships, and our connection to the world. Our addiction to speed has serious consequences. We make more mistakes. We are more stressed. Our relationships become transactional. We lose the ability to savor experiences. The psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking, Fast and Slow, describes two modes of thought. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and emotional. System 2 is slower, more deliberative, and more logical. Our fast-paced world encourages us to live almost entirely in System 1, leading to snap judgments and cognitive biases. We are losing the habit of slow, careful thought. The medieval wisdom of slowness is an invitation to change our pace. It's a reminder that not everything can be or should be rushed. It's about single tasking instead of multitasking. It's about taking the time to cook a real meal, to have a long conversation, to read a book deeply, to walk instead of drive. It is not about being unproductive. It is about recognizing that many of the most important things in life, love, wisdom, trust, mastery, can only be cultivated slowly over time. This forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions. Is our economic system's demand for constant accelerating growth fundamentally at war with a healthy, sustainable human pace of life? Have our technologies, which were meant to save us time, actually created a culture of time poverty by filling every moment with new demands? If we were to collectively decide to slow down, would it lead to a more humane world or to economic collapse and stagnation? Number 14, who told you that you need so much? We are bombarded by thousands of advertisements a day, each one carrying the same subtle message: you are not enough. Your life is incomplete. You need this car, this phone, this cream, this holiday to be happy, successful, and worthy of love. We live in a culture of manufactured desire. The wisdom from the medieval world, particularly from its spiritual traditions, offers a radical counter-narrative. The path to contentment is not through getting more, but through wanting less. Medieval society was, for most people, a world of profound material scarcity. But within this scarcity, a powerful philosophy of simplicity emerged, especially within monasticism. The vows of poverty taken by monks and nuns were not just about renouncing wealth. They were a spiritual technology designed to free the soul from the distractions of material desire. Saint Benedict's rule, which governed thousands of monasteries, specified a life of extreme simplicity. A monk was to have only the most basic necessities: a tunic, a cowl, shoes, a knife, a needle. He was to regard all the utensils and goods of the monastery as sacred vessels of the altar. This attitude elevates the ordinary and encourages a mindful stewardship of the few things one possesses. This idea was not confined to the cloister. The mendicant orders of the 13th century, like the Franciscans and Dominicans, took this message out into the world. St. Francis of Assisi is perhaps the most famous example. The son of a wealthy cloth merchant, he dramatically renounced his inheritance to live a life of absolute poverty, identifying with the poorest and most marginalized people in society. His life was a powerful critique of the growing commercialism of the Italian city-states. He preached a message of spiritual joy found not in possessions, but in a deep connection to God, to fellow humans, and to the natural world, as expressed in his famous Canticle of the Sun. Our modern world is built on the opposite principle. The advertising industry, which took its modern form in the early 20th century, is explicitly designed to create a sense of dissatisfaction. Pioneers of public relations like Edward Bernays, a nephew of Sigmund Freud, used psychological principles to link mass-produced goods to people's unconscious desires for love, power, and social status. The result is a perpetual state of wanting. As soon as we acquire one thing, a new, better version is dangled before us. We are trapped on a hedonic treadmill, running faster and faster just to stay in the same place emotionally. The modern concept of voluntary simplicity or downshifting is a secular version of the wisdom of Saint Francis. It's about consciously choosing to reduce one's income and consumption in order to gain more free time and reduce stress. Studies in positive psychology, particularly the work of researchers like Ed Diener, have consistently shown that once our basic needs are met, increases in income and material wealth have a surprisingly small effect on our overall life satisfaction. The medieval monks knew this intuitively. They understood that the accumulation of possessions often leads not to happiness, but to anxiety. The wisdom of wanting less is a powerful act of rebellion in a consumer culture. It's about learning to distinguish between our needs and our wants. It's about finding joy in non-material things, a walk in the park, a conversation with a friend, the mastery of a skill. It is about understanding that the richest person is not the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. But this raises fundamental challenges. Is the desire for more an innate part of human nature, or is it a cultural construct we can unlearn? What would happen to our economy, which depends on consumer spending, if a significant portion of the population suddenly decided they had enough? Is it possible for a society to provide a high quality of life for all its citizens without relying on a culture of endless, unsustainable consumption? Number 13, where does your story come from? We consume stories at an incredible rate. We binge watch entire seasons of television in a weekend, scroll through endless feeds of short videos, and are constantly plugged into a global news cycle. Our stories are mass-produced, disposable, and often designed to provoke a quick emotional reaction. In the largely illiterate world of the Middle Ages, stories were a precious, shared resource. The wisdom was to live within a shared story. For a medieval person, their individual life was part of a much larger narrative. The most important of these was the Christian story of creation, fall, redemption, and final judgment. This narrative gave meaning to everything, from the changing of the seasons to the experience of suffering. It answered the big questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? The art and architecture of the cathedrals were Bibles for the poor, telling these stories through stained glass, sculpture, and ritual. The liturgy and the church calendar constantly reenacted this sacred drama, embedding it deep in the collective consciousness. Alongside this grand, universal story were countless local ones. Every village had its own tales of saints, fairies, and local heroes. Bards and minstrels traveled from court to court, reciting epic poems like Beowulf or the Chanson de Roland. These were not just entertainment, they were the glue that held a culture together. They transmitted values, history, and a shared sense of identity. Storytelling was a communal, oral event. A storyteller had to hold the attention of a live audience, adapting the tale to their reactions. The stories were alive, changing and evolving with each telling. They belonged to everyone and no one. Today, our shared stories are fragmented. The grand religious and national narratives that once provided a common framework have lost their power for many people. Instead, we have a fracturing of the consensus, as journalists often call it. We retreat into ideological echo chambers, consuming media that confirms our existing biases. Our stories are no longer a source of unity, but a driver of division, and the nature of the stories has changed. They are often cynical, ironic, or nihilistic. The heroes are flawed anti-heroes. The endings are ambiguous. This may be a more realistic reflection of a complex world, but it can also leave us feeling unmoored and without a sense of purpose. The medieval idea of living within a shared story is about understanding our deep human need for meaning and belonging. It's not about uncritically accepting ancient myths. It's about recognizing the power of narrative to shape our lives. It's a call to be more conscious about the stories we consume and the stories we tell. It's about finding or creating narratives that are life-affirming, that connect us to something larger than ourselves, whether it's a family history, a community project, a social movement, or a spiritual tradition. The psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Holocaust, wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that the primary human drive is not pleasure, but the pursuit of what we find meaningful. A good story is a vessel for meaning. So what are the big unknowns as we move from a world of a few shared campfire stories to a world of infinite personalized content streams? What is happening to our ability to empathize with people who live in different story worlds? Is it possible for a diverse, pluralistic society to create new, inclusive, shared narratives that can bind us together without suppressing our differences? Or is our future one of perpetual narrative warfare? Number 12, have you forgotten how to play? We tend to see play as something for children. For adults, life is serious business. And we work, we have responsibilities, we pursue goals. Even our leisure time is often structured and purposeful. We go to the gym to improve our health, take a class to improve our skills, or network to improve our career prospects. The medieval world, despite its hardships, seems to have retained a space for something we've largely lost: true, purposeless play. Life for a medieval peasant was filled with grueling labor, but it was punctuated by an astonishing number of holidays and festivals. Some estimates suggest that, including Sundays, people may have had up to a third of the year off from regular work. These were not quiet days of rest, they were times of intense, boisterous, and often chaotic celebration. There were church festivals like Christmas, Easter, and Whitsun, but also agricultural festivals tied to the seasons like May Day and the Harvest Home. These events involve feasting, drinking, music, dancing, and games. The historian Ronald Hutton has documented the rich tapestry of these folk traditions. A key feature of many of these festivals was the idea of the world turned upside down. During the Feast of Fools, for example, a junior member of the clergy would be elected bishop for a day and would preside over a parody of the Mass. The social hierarchies were temporarily inverted. The sacred was mocked, and the fool was celebrated as wise. The Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin called this the carnivalesque. He argued that carnival was not just a safety valve for social tensions, but a vital part of the culture, a space where laughter, chaos, and the grotesque could challenge the official, serious world of church and state. It was a form of collective, cathartic play. We have largely sanitized and commercialized our celebrations. Our holidays are often stressful, expensive affairs focused on consumption. We have lost the spirit of genuine, anarchic fun. The psychologist Peter Gray argues in his book Free to Learn that the decline of free, unstructured play among children is a major cause of the rise in anxiety and depression. He makes a compelling case that play is not a luxury but a biological necessity for healthy emotional and social development. What is true for children is also true for adults. Play allows us to be creative, to experiment, to build social bonds, and to relieve stress. It is, by its very nature, an activity done for its own sake, not for some future reward. It is the opposite of work. The medieval wisdom of play is a reminder that a life without foolishness, without laughter, and without purposeless joy is an impoverished one. It's an invitation to reclaim a space for genuine play in our overscheduled, overserious lives. It means doing things just for the fun of it, without worrying about whether they are productive or self-improving. It could be joining a local sports team, playing a board game with friends, learning a musical instrument badly, or just being silly with your kids. It's about remembering that the fool on the edge of the festival has a wisdom that the king on his throne often lacks. This leads to some interesting questions. Has our culture of self-optimization turned even our leisure into a form of work, thereby eliminating the possibility of true play? What if the rise in mental health problems is partly a form of play deprivation on a societal scale? Could reintroducing more public festivals and unstructured communal fun be a powerful public health intervention? Number 11, who taught you to fear your own body? Our modern relationship with our bodies is often one of conflict. We fight against aging, we discipline our appetites, we feel ashamed of our imperfections. We see the body as a machine to be optimized or an object to be perfected, often disconnected from our mind or spirit. The medieval worldview, while complex and sometimes contradictory, often had a more integrated earthly understanding of the body. Their wisdom was to see the body not as an enemy, but as a flawed but essential part of a whole person. It's true that some strands of medieval Christian thought were deeply suspicious of the body and its desires. The sins of lust and gluttony were a major concern for theologians, and the lives of ascetic saints who mortified their flesh were held up as an ideal. But this is only part of the story. For most people, life was unavoidably physical. You worked with your body, you felt hunger and cold and pain in your body, and you celebrated with your body through feasting and dancing. The body was not an abstract concept, it was the direct, unmediated experience of being alive. The Central Christian Doctrine of the Incarnation podcast. The belief that God became human in the body of Jesus gave the physical body a profound spiritual dignity. The body was not a prison for the soul, but the vehicle for its salvation. This is reflected in medieval art, which is full of vivid, and sometimes surprisingly graphic, depictions of the human body in all its states: birth, suffering, death, and resurrection. The cult of saints' relics, where the physical remains of a holy person were venerated, shows a belief in the enduring power and sanctity of the body even after death. Furthermore, the pre-modern understanding of health was holistic. The theory of the four humors blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, inherited from the ancient Greeks, held that health was a matter of balance between these bodily fluids, which were in turn affected by diet, climate, and emotional state. Mind and body were seen as inextricably linked. Sickness was not just a mechanical failure, but a disharmony of the whole person. The healers like Hildegard of Bingen prescribed remedies that included not just herbs and foods, but also music, gemstones, and prayer, treating the soul as well as the body. We have, in many ways, lost this integrated perspective. The philosopher René Descartes in the 17th century famously split the world into mind and matter, and we have lived with the consequences ever since. Our medical system is brilliant at treating the body as a complex machine, but it often struggles to account for the role of emotions, stress, and spirit in health and illness. We are only now, through fields like psychoneuroimmunology, beginning to scientifically rediscover the deep connections between our thoughts and our physical health. We talk about mind-body connection as if it's a new discovery, not an ancient truth we've forgotten. The medieval wisdom is to embrace our embodiment. It is to listen to the signals our body sends us, to respect its rhythms of hunger and fatigue, to accept its imperfections and its inevitable decline. It's about finding joy in physical sensation, the warmth of the sun, the taste of good food, the pleasure of movement. It is a call to see our bodies not as objects to be judged, but as the miraculous, messy, and finite home of our being in the world. But this raises profound questions we are still grappling with. As technology allows us to increasingly modify, enhance, and even replace parts of our bodies, what does it mean to be human? Is there a point where our quest to perfect the body leads to a loss of our humanity? Could our modern fear of aging and death be a symptom of a culture that has lost a spiritual framework for understanding the body's natural life cycle? Number 10, is it better to be a generalist or a specialist? Our world values specialization. From a young age, we are encouraged to choose a path, to focus on a narrow field, and to become an expert in it. Our education system and our careers are built around this principle. A jack of all trades is often seen as a master of none. The medieval world, especially for those outside the specialized guilds, required a different kind of intelligence. The wisdom was to be a master of the everyday, a generalist out of necessity. Consider a medieval peasant or homesteader. They could not call a plumber, an electrician, or a contractor. They had to be all of those things themselves. A man had to be a farmer, a veterinarian, a carpenter, and a builder. He needed to know how to read the weather, how to mend a tool, how to butcher an animal, and how to build a fence. A woman had to be a cook, a baker, a brewer, a weaver, a seamstress, an herbalist, and a midwife. Her domain was the economy. In its original sense, the management of the household. This wasn't a hobby, this was a vast and complex set of skills necessary for the family's survival. This polymath existence was not limited to peasants. A figure like Leonardo da Vinci, who came at the very end of the medieval period, is the ultimate example of a generalist genius. But even a typical parish priest had to be a theologian, a counselor, a manager of a small estate, and often the only literate person in the village, acting as a scribe and a lawyer. A monastic community like the one described in the Rule of St. Benedict was designed to be a self-sufficient unit, with monks performing all the necessary tasks, from farming and cooking to copying manuscripts and practicing medicine. Specialization existed in the towns with the craft guilds, but the baseline for most people was a broad competence in the practical arts of living. We have moved in the opposite direction. We have outsourced almost every practical skill. We buy our food, we pay people to fix our homes, we rely on specialists for every aspect of our lives. This has led to incredible technological and scientific progress, but it has also made us more dependent and, in some ways, less resilient. When one part of our complex system, a specialist, breaks down, we are often left helpless. The writer Robert Heinlein famously wrote, "A human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects." The medieval wisdom of the generalist is a call to reclaim our practical competence. It's about learning how to do things for ourselves again. It encourages a lifelong curiosity and a willingness to learn across different domains. It's about understanding the basics of how our world works, from how to grow a tomato to how to fix a leaky faucet to how to read a balance sheet. This doesn't mean we have to abandon our specialized careers. It means cultivating a broader base of skills that makes us more capable, more independent, and more connected to the physical reality of our lives. It builds self-reliance and a quiet confidence that is hard to achieve when you are completely dependent on others for your basic needs. But what are the real trade-offs? In a world of ever-increasing complexity, is the ideal of the competent generalist just a romantic fantasy? Has knowledge become so vast that true mastery is only possible in a tiny niche? And if we all become generalists, will we lose the focused expertise that is necessary to solve our biggest challenges, from curing diseases to developing new energy sources? Number 9, what are you really afraid of? We live in a culture of fear, but our fears are often abstract and chronic. We fear economic collapse, climate change, social disapproval, and not living up to our potential. These are persistent low-grade anxieties that hum in the background of our lives. The medieval world was a place of acute, immediate, and visceral fear. People feared starvation, plague, violence, and eternal damnation. Their relationship with fear was different, and from it we can learn a strange kind of wisdom to face your fears squarely because they are a part of life. The concept of memento mori, remember you must die, was not a morbid obsession. It was a central spiritual practice. Skulls and skeletons were common motifs in art and on tombs. The Dance of Death was a popular artistic theme, depicting people from all walks of life, popes, kings, peasants, and children being led away by death. The message was not to be depressed, but to be prepared. It was a reminder of the preciousness and fragility of life, and an encouragement to live well and to be ready for the final judgment. By confronting the ultimate fear, death, people hope to rob it of its power and to put their smaller daily fears into perspective. Fear was also socialized through storytelling. The fairy tales and folk tales that we have inherited from this period, as collected by the Brothers Grimm, are famously dark. They are full of dangerous forests, child-eating witches, and cruel stepmothers. These stories were not meant to traumatize children. They were a form of psychological inoculation. They taught children that the world can be a dangerous place, that evil exists, but that courage, cleverness, and virtue can overcome it. They provided a safe, symbolic space to explore and process fear. Our modern approach is often to avoid fear. We try to create a world for our children that is perfectly safe, free from any risk or discomfort. We shy away from conversations about death and suffering. We seek comfort and distraction when we feel anxious. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt, in his book The Coddling of the American Mind, argues that this culture of safetyism is backfiring, creating a generation of young people who are more anxious and less resilient because they have never been given the chance to develop their own coping mechanisms. The medieval wisdom is not to seek out danger, but to accept fear as an inevitable and even useful part of the human experience. Fear is an emotion that signals a threat. The key is to learn how to respond to it with courage and prudence, rather than letting it paralyze you or lead you to avoidance. It's a call for what we might now call exposure therapy on a cultural level. By looking at the hard things, our own mortality, the existence of suffering, the possibility of failure, we can learn to live with them. We can build our antifragility, a term coined by the writer Nassim Nicholas Taleb to describe things that gain from disorder. By facing small fears, we build the strength to face bigger ones. But this raises some very deep and unresolved questions. Is there a fundamental difference between the acute survival-based fears of the medieval world and the chronic existential anxieties of our own. Can one really prepare for death? Or is that a story we tell ourselves to manage an unbearable terror? In our attempts to create a safer world, are we accidentally stripping life of the challenges that are necessary for us to develop courage and character? Number 8, do you worship at the altar of the new? Our culture is obsessed with novelty. We crave the latest phone, the newest fashion, the next big thing. We value innovation, disruption, and progress above all else. New and improved is the highest form of praise. To be old-fashioned is to be irrelevant. The medieval mind was oriented in the opposite direction. Their world was built on a reverence for tradition. Their wisdom was to trust the old ways because they had been tested by time. In the Middle Ages, the best way to justify an idea or a practice was to claim that it was ancient. Kings and popes based their authority on long lines of succession, stretching back into the mists of time. Scholars like Thomas Aquinas did not see their role as inventing new philosophies, but as synthesizing and harmonizing the ancient wisdom of Aristotle with the revealed truth of the Christian scriptures. The common law in England was built on the principle of precedent, the idea that decisions should be based on what has been done before. Innovation was often viewed with suspicion. A new idea was likely to be a dangerous heresy. The assumption was that wisdom lay in the past, with the church fathers, the classical philosophers, and in the customs passed down from one's ancestors. This was not just an intellectual posture, it shaped everyday life. A farmer planted his crops the way his father and grandfather had before him, because that was the way that worked. A craftsman learned his trade through a long apprenticeship, slowly absorbing the traditional techniques of his guild. Social structures, from the family to the monarchy, were seen as ancient, divinely ordained, and resistant to change. This mindset provided a powerful sense of stability and continuity. You knew your place in the world, and you knew that it was the same place your ancestors had occupied. Your life was part of a chain stretching from the distant past to the far future. We have broken this chain. The scientific revolution and the Enlightenment taught us to question authority and tradition, and to trust in reason and empirical evidence. This has led to unimaginable progress in science, technology, and human rights. But it has also left us with a sense of historical amnesia. We live in a perpetual present with little connection to the past and an often fearful view of the future. The writer G.K. Chesterton called tradition the democracy of the dead. He argued that it was arrogant for the living to ignore the accumulated wisdom of the countless generations who came before us. The medieval reverence for tradition is a challenge to our cult of the new. It's a reminder that not all change is progress, and not everything old is obsolete. It's a call to learn from history, to study the classics, to listen to the stories of our elders. It encourages us to value things that are durable, that are built to last, whether it's a well-made tool, a timeless piece of music, or a relationship that has weathered many storms. It suggests that before we rush to disrupt or dismantle an institution or a custom, we should first try to understand why it has survived for so long. This is the essence of the Chesterton's fence principle. Don't ever take a fence down until you know the reason why it was put up. And yet, this poses a serious dilemma. How do we distinguish between wise traditions that should be preserved and harmful ones that perpetuate injustice and hold back progress? If we become too reverent toward the past, do we lose the ability to adapt to new circumstances and create a better future? Is it possible to build a society that successfully balances the stability of tradition with the dynamism of innovation? Number 7, how much of your life is a performance? We live our lives on a stage. Through social media, we carefully curate a personal brand. We post our successes, our perfect holidays, our attractive meals. We perform a version of ourselves for an audience of friends, followers, and strangers. We are constantly aware of how we are being perceived. The medieval world, with its rigid social hierarchy, was also full of performance. But it also contained a powerful ideal of authenticity, of being the same person in private as you are in public. Medieval society was highly structured. You were a peasant, a knight, a priest, or a lord. Each role came with a set of expectations, a costume to wear, and a script to follow. The ceremonies of the royal court or the rituals of the church were elaborate performances designed to reinforce this social order. But beneath this surface of social roles, there was a deep concern with the state of the inner person, the soul. The practice of confession, for example, was a private, one-on-one encounter where a person was expected to be completely honest about their failings. The goal was to close the gap between the outer self and the inner self. The great spiritual writers of the Middle Ages were deeply concerned with authenticity. The 14th century mystic Meister Eckhart preached about the importance of letting go of all roles and images to discover the spark of the soul, the divine essence within. The ideal was not to create a better public image, but to purify the inner self. The 7 deadly sins, a common teaching tool, are all about these internal states: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. They are not about what you do, but about who you are on the inside. The ultimate performance was not for a human audience, but for God, who could see directly into the human heart. We have, in many ways, reversed this. Our culture is less concerned with the state of our soul and more obsessed with our public image. The sociologist Irving Goffman in the 1950s used the metaphor of theater to describe social interaction. He talked about front stage and backstage behavior, the way we perform our roles for others. Social media has put this on steroids. We now live almost entirely on the front stage. We are constantly managing our online profile, which often bears little resemblance to our messy, complicated, backstage reality. This can lead to a profound sense of alienation and a feeling of being a fraud in our own lives. The studies have linked heavy social media use to increased rates of depression and anxiety, partly because of the constant social comparison and the pressure to perform. The medieval wisdom of authenticity is a call to step off the stage. It's an invitation to spend more time in the backstage of our lives, to be honest with ourselves and with a few trusted others. It's about valuing integrity, the state of being whole and undivided over image. It means focusing more on your character than on your reputation. It's a reminder that what you are when no one is watching is who you really are. It's about cultivating a rich inner life that doesn't need external validation to feel real. But the questions remain. In a world where so much of our social and professional life happens online, is it even possible to opt out of the performance? What if creating and maintaining a personal brand is now a necessary survival skill? Is there a way to use our modern tools of communication in a way that fosters genuine connection and authenticity rather than performance and alienation? Number 6, what is the difference between a home and a house? For many of us, a house is an asset. It's an investment, a line on a balance sheet. We buy and sell houses based on market trends and school districts. We live in them, but they are often just temporary stops on our career path. The medieval concept of a home was something very different. It was not an asset, but an anchor. The wisdom was to see your home not as a thing you own, but as the center of your world. For a medieval family, the home was the hub of almost all of life's activities. It was the workplace, the school, the hospital, and the social center. A peasant's cottage was not just a place to sleep. The family might keep animals inside during the winter. There would be a spinning wheel, a loom, or other tools for craft production. It was where food was grown, processed, and cooked. It was where children were born and educated in the skills they would need for life. It was where the sick were cared for and the old died, surrounded by their family. The home was a multifunctional, multi-generational living working space. This idea of the home as the center of production was destroyed by the Industrial Revolution, which separated work from home. The home became a private refuge from the harsh public world of the factory and the office, a haven in a heartless world, as the historian Christopher Lasch called it. This was a major social transformation. The home was no longer a place where families worked together, but a place where a male breadwinner returned after a day of work elsewhere to be cared for by a wife who was now confined to the domestic sphere. The medieval home was also deeply connected to its place. It was built from local materials: wood from the nearby forest, stone from the local quarry, thatch from the local reeds. It was designed to work with the local climate. It was part of the landscape, not something imposed upon it. And it was a place of memory. A house might be in the same family for generations. It was filled with the stories of births, deaths, and marriages. It was not a sterile box, but a living repository of family history. The word hearth, which refers to the fireplace at the center of the home, has come to symbolize this sense of warmth, family, and belonging. Our modern houses are often the opposite. They are built from standardized, mass-produced materials shipped from all over the world. They are often designed with little regard for the local environment, and because we move so often, they rarely have the chance to accumulate the layers of memory that turn a house into a home. The modern home office trend is a partial return to the medieval model of integrating work and home, but it often lacks the communal, family-based aspect of its predecessor. The wisdom of the medieval home is a call to re-inhabit our living spaces. It's about seeing our home as more than just a financial investment or a place to sleep. It's about making it a center of creativity, productivity, and connection. It could mean starting a vegetable garden, cooking more meals from scratch, setting up a workshop in the garage, or simply spending more time talking and telling stories with the people you live with. It's about creating a place that nourishes you, that reflects who you are, and that connects you to your family and your piece of the earth. But this raises some challenging issues. Is the ideal of a multi-generational working home simply incompatible with the structure of our modern economy and our desire for individual freedom? Does the integration of work and home risk blurring the boundaries so much that we can never truly rest? In an age of high housing costs and economic precarity, is the idea of a stable, long-term family home becoming an impossible dream for many? Number 5, do you see the sacred in the ordinary? We tend to divide the world into two separate realms, the sacred and the secular. The sacred belongs in a church, a temple, or a synagogue on a specific day of the week. The rest of life's story, our work, our meals, our daily routines is secular, ordinary, and mundane. For the medieval person, this sharp division would have been incomprehensible. The world was charged with spiritual meaning. The wisdom was to find the sacred not by escaping the world, but by paying closer attention to it. In the medieval Christian worldview, the entire world was God's creation, and was therefore infused with divine significance. Nature was not just a collection of resources, it was a book filled with symbols that pointed to spiritual truths. A lamb was a symbol of Christ, a pelican was a symbol of self-sacrifice, a lily was a symbol of purity. This way of seeing the world, known as the ontological imagination, meant that the material world was a constant source of spiritual revelation. This sense of the sacred extended to the rhythms of daily life. The ringing of the church bells for the canonical hours, from matins before dawn to compline after sunset, marked the day not just as a period of work, but as a journey of prayer. The act of baking bread was not just a chore, it echoed the Eucharist, the central Christian sacrament. The agricultural cycle of planting a seed in the dark earth, seeing it die, and then watching it be reborn as a living plant, was a powerful yearly reminder of the story of death and resurrection. The most ordinary, humble task to be seen as a form of prayer, a way of participating in God's creative and redemptive work. The Benedictine motto, Ora et Labora, pray and work, expresses this ideal of an integrated life where the two activities are not separate but are two sides of the same coin. We have largely lost this sacramental imagination. The scientific revolution taught us to see the world as a machine, a collection of matter and energy governed by impersonal laws. This has given us great power to understand and manipulate the world, but it has also, as the sociologist Max Weber put it, led to the disenchantment of the world. The world has become silent, stripped of its deeper meaning and mystery. We live in a functional, one-dimensional reality, and we feel the loss. The modern search for spirituality outside of traditional religion, the interest in mindfulness, the longing for a deeper connection to nature, all of these are symptoms of a world that is hungry for a renewed sense of the sacred. The medieval wisdom of an enchanted world is a call to see with new eyes. It's about practicing a kind of mindful attention to the present moment, to the details of our ordinary lives. It's about finding a sense of wonder in a sunset, a sense of gratitude in a simple meal, a sense of connection in a conversation. It's about understanding that you don't have to go on a retreat or climb a mountain to have a spiritual experience. The sacred is right here, right now, hidden in plain sight in the midst of the mundane. The 13th century mystic Meister Eckhart said, "If the only prayer you said in your whole life was, 'Thank you,' that would suffice." But this poses a challenge to our modern sensibilities. Can a rational scientific person honestly re-enchant the world without engaging in wishful thinking or superstition? Is it possible to find a sense of the sacred that is not tied to a specific religious dogma, but is open to people of all beliefs and none? And if we do succeed in finding the sacred in the ordinary, how does that change the way we live, the way we treat each other, and the way we treat the planet? Number 4, what is true wealth? Our society defines wealth in almost exclusively financial terms. A wealthy person is someone with a lot of money, a large stock portfolio, and valuable assets. We measure the success of a nation by its gross domestic product GDP, a measure of its economic output. This is a very narrow and, some would argue, a very impoverished view of wealth. The medieval world, while certainly not immune to the temptations of gold, held a broader and more complex understanding of what it means to be rich. Their wisdom was to recognize that true wealth lies in things that money can't buy. In the medieval social order, wealth was not just about money, it was about land, and land was about more than just its economic value. It was about heritage, status, and power, but even more important than land or money was a person's reputation and their relationships. In a small, close-knit community, your good name was your most valuable asset. A reputation for honesty, piety, and generosity was a form of social capital that could be more valuable than gold. Your wealth was also measured by the strength of your alliances, your family, your kin, your lord, your guild. These networks of mutual obligation were the ultimate safety net in a dangerous world. Christian teaching provided a powerful critique of material wealth. Jesus' statement that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God was taken very seriously. Wealth was seen as a spiritual danger, a temptation to pride, and a distraction from God. The virtue of charity, or caritas, was held up as the highest ideal. A truly wealthy person was one who was generous to the poor and the church. The great cathedrals of Europe were built not by governments, but by the collective donations of the entire community, from wealthy merchants to poor peasants giving their last penny. It was an investment in a different kind of wealth, communal pride, and eternal salvation. We have turned this on its head. We often admire the rich, regardless of how they made their money or what they do with it. We have created an economic system that incentivizes the accumulation of private wealth, often at the expense of the public good. And we have devalued the things that don't have a clear price tag, a strong community, a healthy environment, free time, and peace of mind. The environmental crisis is perhaps the ultimate example of this. We have pursued economic growth GDP by destroying the natural world, our real shared wealth. The economist Kate Raworth, in her book Donut Economics, argues for a new model of economics that is not focused on endless growth, but on meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. This is a modern attempt to rediscover a more holistic definition of wealth. The medieval wisdom of true wealth is a challenge to our modern metrics of success. It asks us to do a different kind of accounting. What is the value of a clean river, a safe neighborhood, a close-knit family, a body of useful skills, or a quiet mind? These are the things that make for a rich life, but they don't show up in our bank accounts or on the national balance sheet. It's a call to shift our priorities from private accumulation to shared well-being. It is about understanding that a person with a lot of money but no love, no community, and no purpose is not rich, but deeply poor. And this leads to the most fundamental questions of all. Is it possible to create an economic system that measures and prioritizes true human and ecological well-being rather than just the flow of money? What would our society look like if we collectively decided that enough is a good thing and that the pursuit of infinite wealth on a finite planet is a form of madness? And can we, as individuals, find the courage to define our own lives by a richer, deeper, and more meaningful standard of wealth, even when our culture tells us we are fools for doing so? Number 3, how do you tame a wild mind? We are at war with our own minds. We are plagued by anxiety, distracted by trivialities, and caught in loops of negative thinking. We try to control our minds with to-do lists, productivity apps, and sheer willpower, but we often fail. The mind seems to have a will of its own. The medieval world, particularly its contemplative traditions, developed a sophisticated set of practices for working with the mind. Their wisdom was not to conquer the mind, but to befriend it. The monks and mystics of the Middle Ages were the psychologists of their day. They spent thousands of hours in silent observation of their own consciousness. They understood that the mind is a restless, chattering monkey. The challenge was not to silence the monkey by force, but to gently give it something to do so that a deeper, quieter state of awareness could emerge. The practices of prayer and meditation were the tools for this. The repetition of a simple prayer, like the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner, or the focus on the breath, was a way of anchoring the wandering mind. This is remarkably similar to the use of a mantra in Eastern meditation traditions. The goal of these practices was not just to calm down, it was to achieve a state of inner clarity and to open oneself to a deeper reality. The 14th century anonymous English classic, The Cloud of Unknowing, offers a practical guide to this kind of contemplative prayer. The author advises the reader to put a cloud of forgetting between themselves and all their thoughts, and to rest in a simple, wordless, loving stirring towards God. This is not about thinking about God, but about being present to a reality that is beyond thought. It is a radical training in letting go of the ego's constant stream of commentary and control. Our modern secular world is rediscovering these techniques under the banner of mindfulness. The work of Jon Kabat-Zinn, who developed the mindfulness-based stress reduction MBISR program in the 1970s, has brought a form of Buddhist meditation into the mainstream of medicine and psychology. Countless studies have now shown the benefits of mindfulness for reducing stress, improving focus, and managing emotional reactivity. We are using modern science to validate the insights that medieval contemplatives discovered through centuries of inner exploration. We are learning, once again, that we cannot control our thoughts, but we can change our relationship to them. We can learn to observe them without being swept away by them. The medieval wisdom of taming the mind is a call to look inward. It is an invitation to practice the art of paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment. It doesn't require a monastery or a religious belief. It can be practiced for a few minutes a day just by sitting quietly and focusing on the sensation of your breath. It is about creating a small space of stillness in our busy lives. It is about realizing that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness that is watching the thoughts. In that realization lies a profound and liberating peace. But what are the final frontiers of consciousness that we still don't understand? Is the quiet, aware state described by mystics and meditators a fundamental aspect of the universe, or just a pleasant neurological illusion? As we get better at using technology to manipulate our brain states, what is the risk that we will opt for a quick chemical fix for our mental turmoil rather than doing the hard, transformative work of self-awareness? And could a society that practiced mindfulness on a wide scale be a more compassionate, wise, and peaceful society? Number two, what is the point of a feast if there is no fast? We live in a state of perpetual feast. We can have any food we want, at any time of day, at the press of a button. Our entertainment is on demand, our comforts are constant. We have eliminated the experience of want from many of our lives. But in doing so, we have also diminished the experience of pleasure. If you eat cake every day, cake ceases to be a treat. The medieval world understood a deep psychological truth that we have forgotten the wisdom of fasting. For a medieval person, fasting was a regular and important part of life. The church calendar prescribed periods of fasting and abstinence, most notably during the 40 days of Lent before Easter, but also on Fridays, and on the vigils before major feast days. For a peasant, this religious requirement often coincided with the reality of a meager food supply, especially in the late winter before the spring crops came in. Fasting typically meant abstaining from meat, dairy, and eggs. It was not about total starvation, but about a significant simplification of the diet. This practice had multiple layers of meaning. It was a form of spiritual discipline, a way of training the will and subordinating the desires of the body to the needs of the soul. It was an act of solidarity with the poor, who lived in a state of enforced fasting every day. And it was an act of penance, a way of atoning for one's sins, but it also had a profound psychological effect. By voluntarily embracing a period of scarcity, the feast that followed became all the more joyful and celebratory. The wild feasting of Christmas or Easter had a meaning and a flavor that is impossible to replicate when every day is a feast. The fast created the appetite, the longing, that made the feast a true celebration. We have lost this rhythm of fasting and feasting. Our holidays are often just a more intense version of our everyday consumption. Thanksgiving is a bigger dinner. Christmas is a bigger shopping spree. The element of contrast is gone. The modern intermittent fasting and dopamine fasting movements are a secular attempt to reclaim this ancient wisdom. People are discovering that by restricting their eating window or by taking a break from the constant stimulation of their smartphones, they can reset their bodies and their brains. They feel healthier, more focused, and they rediscover a sense of real pleasure in a simple meal or a quiet conversation. It is the principle of contrast. Light is most beautiful after darkness. Warmth is most welcome after cold. And a feast is most joyful after a fast. The medieval wisdom of fasting is a call to reintroduce voluntary scarcity into our lives of abundance. It is about understanding that more is not always better. It's about the power of the pause. This doesn't have to mean religious fasting. It could mean taking a day a week off from social media. It could mean trying a buy nothing month. It could mean a digital Sabbath from Friday night to Saturday night. It is about intentionally creating space and quiet in our cluttered lives. It is about learning to appreciate what we have by occasionally choosing to go without. But this raises some very modern paradoxes. In a world where many still suffer from involuntary hunger, is there something perverse about the privileged choosing to fast? As our technology creates ever more powerful and addictive forms of stimulation, will our ability to voluntarily abstain from them simply collapse? What if true, lasting happiness is not found in endless pursuit of pleasure, but in the disciplined rhythmic balance between restraint and release, between the fast and the feast? Number one, what are you building that will outlast you? We live in an age of the ephemeral. Our news cycles last 24 hours. Our social media posts disappear in a day. Our careers are a series of short-term gigs. We are focused on the immediate, the now. It can be hard to think about next week, let alone the next century. The most profound piece of wisdom from the medieval world may be a question that challenges this short-term thinking. What are you building that will outlast you? Think again of the person who laid the foundation stones of a great cathedral in the 12th century. He knew he would not see the spire completed. His children might not see it. His grandchildren might. He was building something for a future he could not imagine, for people he would never meet. He was not motivated by personal fame or immediate reward. He was motivated by a deep sense of purpose, a faith in something larger than himself, and a desire to create something of lasting beauty and meaning for his community and for God. This long-term perspective, this cathedral thinking, is perhaps the most valuable and the most challenging legacy of the medieval world. This thinking was not limited to cathedrals. The universities that were founded in the Middle Ages, like Bologna, Paris, and Oxford, were institutions designed to preserve and transmit knowledge across the generations. The legal and political structures that were slowly forged during this period became the foundations for modern Western nations. Even on a smaller scale, a farmer who planted an oak tree knew that it would provide shade and timber, not for him, but for his descendants. There was a sense of being part of a long chain of generations, a responsibility to both the past and the future. The philosopher Edmund Burke in the 18th century would later describe society as a partnership between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. This was a lived reality for many medieval people. We have lost this sense of connection to the long term. Our political cycles are short, focused on the next election. Our economic models are based on quarterly profits. Our culture celebrates instant gratification. We are, as the activist and author Roman Krasneric puts it, colonizing the future. We are using up its resources, polluting its environment, and leaving it with our debts, all for our own short-term benefit. We are like the person who burns the heirloom furniture to keep warm for one night with no thought for the morning. The wisdom of cathedral thinking is a radical challenge to our way of life. It asks us to become good ancestors. It asks us to think about the consequences of our actions on the 7th generation from now. It means planting trees we will never sit under. It means investing in education and infrastructure that will benefit our grandchildren. It means working to solve long-term problems like climate change, even when the solutions are slow, difficult, and offer no immediate political or economic reward. On a personal level, it means thinking about our own legacy. What are we contributing to the world? Are we leaving it a little better than we found it? Are we passing on values, skills, or stories that will endure? It is about shifting our focus from our own short lifespan to the great long story of humanity. And this leaves us with the ultimate unanswered questions. Is humanity, with its evolutionary bias towards short-term survival, even capable of the long-term thinking required to solve our existential challenges? Can we create political and economic systems that reward long-term responsibility instead of short-term gain? And what if the most meaningful life is not the one that is most happy or successful in the moment, but the one that makes the best contribution to the lives of those who are yet to come?